5. Keep yelling, young'un. Mrs. Hoggett shook her head at least a dozen times. For the life of me, I can't see why you do let that pig run all over the place like you do. Round and round the yard he do go, chasing my ducks about, shoving his nose into everything. Shouldn't wonder what he'd be out with you and Fly moving the sheep about afore long. Why doesn't shut him up? He's running all his flesh off. He won't never be fit for Christmas. Easter more like. What do you call him? Just Pig, said Farmer Hoggett. A month had gone by since the village fair, a month in which a lot of interesting things had happened to Babe. The fact that perhaps most concerned his future, though he did not know it, was that Farmer Hoggett had become very fond of him. He liked to see the piglet pottering happily about the yard, with Fly keeping out of mischief as far as he could tell, if you didn't count moving the ducks around. He did this now with a good deal of skill, the farmer noticed, even to the extent of being able, once, to separate the white ducks from the brown, though that must have just been a fluke. The more he thought of it, the less Farmer Hoggett liked the idea of butchering Pig. The other developments were in Babe's education. Despite herself, Fly found that she took pleasure and pride in teaching him the ways of the sheepdog, though she knew that, of course, he would never be fast enough to work sheep. Anyway, the boss would never let him try. As for Ma, she was back with the flock, her foot healed, her cough better. But all the time that she had been shut in the box, Babe had spent every moment that Fly was out of the stables, chatting to the old ewe. Already he understood, in a way that Fly never could, the sheep's point of view. He longed to meet the flock, to be introduced. He thought it would be extremely interesting. "Do you think I could, Ma?" he had said. "Could what, young'un?" "Well, come and visit you when you go back to your friends." "Oh, you could do easy enough. You only got to go through the bottom gate and up the hill to the big field by the lane. Don't know what the farmer'd say, though. Or that wolf." Once Fly had slipped quietly in and found him perched on the straw stack. "Babe," she had said sharply, "you're not talking to that stupid thing, are you?" "Well, yes, Mum, I was." "Save your breath, dear. It won't understand a word you say." "Bah," said Ma. For a moment, Babe was tempted to tell his foster mother what he had in mind, but something told him to keep quiet. Instead, he made a plan. He would wait for two things to happen. First, for Ma to rejoin the flock, and after that, for market day, when both the boss and his mum would be out of the way. Then he would go up the hill. Towards the end of the very next week, the two things had happened. Ma had been turned out, and a couple of days after that, Babe watched as Fly jumped into the back of the Land Rover and it drove out of the yard and away. Babe's were not the only eyes that watched its departure. At the top of the hill, a cattle lorry stood half hidden under a clump of trees at the side of the lane. As soon as the Land Rover had disappeared from sight along the road to the market town, a man jumped hurriedly out and opened the gate into the field. Another backed the lorry into the gateway. Babe, meanwhile, was trotting excitedly up the hill to pay his visit to the flock. He came to the gate at the bottom of the field and squeezed under it. The field was steep and curved, and at first he could not see a single sheep. But then he heard a distant drumming of hooves, and suddenly the whole flock came galloping over the brow of the hill and down towards him. Around them ran two strange collies, lean, silent dogs that seemed to flow effortlessly over the grass. From high above came the sound of a thin whistle, and in easy partnership the dogs swept round the sheep and began to drive them back up the slope. Despite himself, Babe was caught up in the press of jostling, bleating animals and carried along with them. Around him rose a chorus of panting, protesting voices, some shrill, some hoarse, some deep and guttural, but all saying the same thing. "Wolf! Wolf!" cried the flock in dazed confusion. Small by comparison and short in the leg, Babe soon fell behind the main body, and as they reached the top of the hill, he found himself right at the back in company with an old sheep who cried, "Wolf!" more loudly than any. "Ma!" he breathed breathlessly. "It's you!" Behind them, one dog lay down at a whistle, and in front the flock checked as the other dogs steadied them. In the corner of the field, the tailboard and wings of the cattle lorry filled the gateway, and the two men waited, sticks and arms outspread. "Oh, hello, young 'un," puffed the old sheep. "Fine day you come to see. See us, I'll say." "What is it? What's happening? Who are these men?" asked Babe. "Rustlers," said Ma. "They're sheep rustlers." "What do you mean?" "Thieves, young 'un. That's what I do mean. Sheep stealers. We'll all be in thick lorry afore you can blink your eye." "What can we do?" "Do? Ain't nothing we can do unless we can slip past these here wharf." She made as if to escape, but the dog behind darted in and she turned back. Again, one of the men whistled and the dog pressed. Gradually held against the headland of the field by the second dog and the men, the flock began to move forward. Already the leaders were near in the tailboard of the lorry. "We're 'em beat," said Ma mournfully. "You run for it, young 'un." "I will," thought Babe, "but not the way you mean." Little as he was, he felt suddenly not fear, but anger, furious anger that the boss's sheeps were being stolen. "My mum's not here to protect them, so I must," he said to himself bravely, and he ran quickly round the hedge side of the flock and, jumping onto the bottom of the tailboard, turned to face them. "Please," he cried, "I beg you, please don't come any further. If you will be so kind, dear, sensible sheep." His unexpected appearance had a number of immediate effects. The shock of being so politely addressed stopped the flock in its tracks, and the cries of "Wolf" changed to murmurs of "Indy lovely, proper little gentleman." Ma had told them something of her new friend, and now to see him in the flesh and to hear his well-chosen words release them from the dominance of the dogs. They began to fidget and look about for an escape route. This was open for them when the men, cursing quietly, for above all things they were anxious to avoid too much noise, sent the flanking dog to drive the pig away, and some of the sheep began to slip past them. Next moment, all was chaos. Angrily, the dog ran at Babe, who scuttled away, squealing at the top of his voice in a mixture of fright and fury. The men closed on him, sticks raised. Desperately, he shot between the legs of one, who fell with a crash, while the other, striking out madly, hit the rearguard dog as it came to help and sent it yowling. In half a minute, the carefully planned raid was ruined as the sheep scattered everywhere. "Keep yelling, young 'un," bawled Ma as she ran beside Babe. "They won't never stop here with that row going on." And suddenly all sorts of things began to happen as those deafening squeals rang out over the quiet countryside. Birds flew startled from the trees. Cows in nearby fields began to gallop about. Dogs in distant farms to bark. Passing motorists to stop and stare. In the farmhouse below, Mrs. Hoggett heard the noise as she had on the day of the fair. And now it was infinitely louder, the most piercing, nerve-tingling, ear-shattering burglar alarm. She dialed 999, but then talked for so long that by the time a patrol car drove up the lane, the rustlers had long gone. Snarling at each other and their dogs, they had driven hurriedly away with not one single sheep to show for their pains. "You won't never believe it," cried Mrs. Hoggett when her husband returned from market. but we've had rustlers, just about after you'd gone it were, come with a cattle lorry they did. The police said they seen the tar marks in the gateway, and a chap in a car seen the lorry go by in a hurry, and there's been a lot of it about. And he give the alarm, he did, kept screaming and shrieking enough to bust your eardrums. We should have lost every sheep on the place if it weren't for him. 'Tis him we got to thank. Who? Said Farmer Hoggett. Him, said his wife, pointing at Babe, who was telling Fly all about it. Don't ask me how he got there or why he done it. All I knows is he saved our bacon, and now I'm going to save his. He's stopping with us just like another dog. Don't care if he gets as big as a house, because if you think I'm going to stand by and see him butchered after what he done for us today, you've got another think coming. What do you say to that? A slow smile spread over Farmer Hoggett's long face. Chapter 6. Good Pig. The very next morning, Farmer Hoggett decided that he would see if the pig would like to come when he went round the sheep with Fly. I'm daft, he thought, grinning to himself. He did not tell his wife. Seeing him walk down the yard, crook in hand, and hearing him call Fly, Babe was about to settle down for an after-breakfast nap, when to his surprise he heard the farmer's voice again. Come, pig, said Farmer Hoggett, and to his surprise the pig came. I expect it's because of what you did yesterday, said Fly proudly as they walked a hill together up the hill. The boss must be very pleased with you, dear. You can watch me working. When they reached the lower gate, Farmer Hoggett opened it and left it open. He's going to bring them down into the home paddock away from the lane, said Fly quickly. You be quiet and keep out of the way. And she went to sit waiting by the farmer's right side. Come, boy, he said, and Fly ran left up the slope as the sheep began to bunch above her. Once behind them, she addressed them in her usual way, that is to say, sharply. Move, fools, she snapped. Down the hill if you know which way down is. But to her surprise, they did not obey. Instead, they turned to face her, and some even stamped and shook their heads at her, while a great chorus of bleating began. To Fly, sheep talk was just so much rubbish, to which she had never paid any attention. But Babe, listening below, could hear clearly what was being said, and although the principal cry was the usual one, there were other voices saying other things. The contrast between the politeness with which they had been treated by yesterday's rescuer and the everlasting rudeness to which they were subjected by this or any other wolf brought mutinous thoughts into woolly heads, and words of defiance rang out. You've got no manners. Why can't you ask nicely? Treat us like muck, you do, they cried. And one hoarse voice, which the pig recognised, called loudly, We don't want you, wolf. We want Babe. Whereupon they all took it up. We want Babe, they bleated. Babe, Babe, Babe. Those behind pushed at those in front, so that they actually edged a pace or two nearer the dog. For a moment it seemed to Babe that Fly was not going to be able to move them, that she would lose this particular battle of wills. But he had not reckoned with her years of experience. Suddenly, quick as a flash, she drove in on them with a growl, and with a twisting leap sprang for the nose of the foremost animal. Babe heard the clack of her teeth as the ewe fell over backwards in fright, a fright which immediately ran through all. Defiant no longer, the flock poured down the hill, Fly snapping furiously at their heels, and surged widely through the gateway. No manners, no manners, no manners, they cried. But an air of panic ran through them as they realised how rebellious they had been, how the wolf would punish them. They ran helter-skelter into the middle of the paddock, and wheeled as one to look back. Ears pricked, eyes wide with fear. They puffed and blew, and Ma's hacking cough rang out. But to their surprise, they saw that the wolf had dropped by the gateway, and that after a moment the pig came trotting out to one side of them. Though Farmer Hoggett could not know what had caused the near revolt of the flock, he saw clearly that for some reason they had given Fly a hard time, and that she was angry. It was not like her to gallop sheep in that pell-mell fashion. "Steady," he said curtly as she harried the rear guard, and then "down," and "stay," and shut the gate. Shepherding suited Farmer Hoggett. There was no waste of words in it. In the corner of the home paddock nearest to the farm buildings was a smallish fenced yard divided into a number of pens and runways. Here the sheep would be bought at shearing time, or to pick out fat lambs for market, or to be treated for various troubles. Farmer Hoggett had heard the old ewe cough. He thought he would catch her up and give her another drench. He turned to give an order to Fly, lying flat and still behind him. And there, lying flat and still beside her, was the pig. "Stay, Fly," said Hoggett. And just for fun, "Come, pig." Immediately Babe ran forward and sat at the farmer's right, his front trotters placed neatly together, his big ears cocked for the next command. Strange thoughts began to stir in Farmer Hoggett's mind, and unconsciously he crossed his fingers. He took a deep breath and, holding it, "Away to me, pig," he said softly. Without a moment's hesitation, Babe began the long outrun to the right. Quite what Farmer Hoggett had expected to happen, he could never afterwards clearly remember. What he had not expected was that the pig would run round to the rear of the flock and turn to face it and him and lie down instantly without a word of further command spoken, just as a well-trained dog would have done. Admittedly, with his jerky little rocking horse canter, he took twice as long to get there as Fly would have. But still, there he was, in the right place, ready and waiting. Admittedly, the sheep had turned to face the pig and were making a great deal of noise. But then Farmer Hoggett did not know, and Fly would not listen to what they were saying. He called the dog to heel and began to walk with his long loping stride to the collecting pen in the corner. Out in the middle of the paddock, there was a positive babble of talk. "Good morning," said Babe. "I do hope I find you all well and not too distressed by yesterday's experience." And immediately it seemed that every sheep had something to say to him. "Bless his heart," they cried, and "dear little soul," and "hello, Babe," and "nice to see you again." And then there was a rasping cough and the sound of Ma's hoarse tones. "What's up then, young 'un?" she croaked. "What be you doing here instead of that wolf?" Although Babe wanted literally to keep on the right side of the sheep, his loyalty to his foster mother made him say in a rather hurt voice, "She's not a wolf. She's a sheepdog." "Oh, all right then," said Ma. "Sheepdog if you must have it. What dost want then?" Babe looked at the army of long, sad faces. "I want to be a sheep pig," he said. "Ha, ha," bleated a big lamb standing next to Ma. "Ha, ha, ha." "Be quiet," said Ma sharply, swinging her head to give the lamb a thumping butt in the side. "That ain't nothing to laugh at." Raising her voice, she addressed the flock. "Listen to me, all you ewes," she said, "and lambs too. This young chap was kind to me, like I told you, when I were poorly. And I told him, if he was to ask me to go somewhere or do something politely like he would, Why, I'll be only too delighted. We ain't stupid, I told him. All we do want is to be treated right, and we're as bright as the next beast, we are. We are, chorused the flock. We are, we are, we are. Right then, said Ma. What shall us do, Babe? Babe looked across towards Farmer Hoggett, who had opened the gate of the collecting pen and now stood leaning on his crook, Fly at his feet. The pen was in the left bottom corner of the paddock, and so Babe expected, and at that moment got the command, "Come by, Pig," to send him left and so behind the sheep and thus turn them down towards the corner. He cleared his throat. "If I might ask a great favour of you," he said hurriedly, "could you all please be kind enough to walk down to that gate where the farmer is standing and to go through it? Take your time, please. There's absolutely no rush." A look of pure contentment passed over the faces of the flock, and with one accord they turned and walked across the paddock, Babe a few paces in their rear. Sedately they walked, and steadily over to the corner, through the gate, into the pen, and then stood quietly waiting. No one broke ranks or tried to slip away. No one pushed or shoved. There was no noise or fuss. From the oldest to the youngest, they went in like lambs. Then at last a gentle murmur broke out as everyone in different ways quietly expressed their pleasure. "Babe," said Fly to the pig, "that was quite beautifully done, dear." "Thank you so much," said Babe to the sheep. "You did that so nicely." "Ta," said the sheep. "Ta, ta, ta. 'Tis a pleasure to work for such a little gentleman." And Ma added, "You'll make a wonderful sheep, Pig young'un, or my name's not Ma." As for Farmer Hoggett, he heard none of this, so wrapped up was he in his own thoughts. "He's as good as a dog," he told himself excitedly. "He's better than a dog, than any dog. I wonder." "Good Pig," he said. Then he uncrossed his fingers and closed the gate. Chapter 7. What Trials? Every day after that, of course, Babe went the rounds with Farmer Hoggett and Fly. At first, the farmer worried about using the pig to herd the sheep, not because it was a strange and unusual thing to do, which people might laugh at. He did not care about that, but because he was afraid it might upset Fly and put her nose out of joint. However, it did not seem to do so. He could have spared himself the worry if he had been able to listen to their conversation. "That was fun," said Babe to Fly that evening. "I wonder if the boss will let me do some more work." "I'm sure he will, dear. You did it so well. It was almost as though the sheep knew exactly what it was you wanted them to do." "But that's just it. I asked them." "No use asking sheep anything, dear," interrupted Fly. "You have to make them do what you want. I've told you before." "Yes, Mum, but will you mind if the boss uses me instead of you sometimes?" "Mind?" said Fly. "You bet your trotters I won't. All my life I've had to run round after those idiots uphill, down dale, day in, day out. And as for sometimes, as far as I'm concerned, you can work them every day. I'm not as young as I was. I'll be only too happy to lie comfortably in the grass and watch you, my babe." And before long, that was exactly what she was doing. Once Farmer Hoggett could see by her wagging tail and smiling eyes that she was perfectly happy about it, he began to use Babe to do some of her work. At first, he only gave the pig simple tasks, but as the days and weeks went by, Hoggett began to make more and more use of his new helper. The speed with which Babe learned amazed him, and before long he was relying on him for all the work with the flock, while Fly lay and proudly watched. Now there was nothing, it seemed, that the pig could not do, and do faultlessly at that. He obeyed all the usual commands immediately and correctly. He could fetch sheep or take them away, move them to left or right, persuade them round obstacles or through gaps, cut the flock in half, or take out one individual. To drench Ma, for instance, there was no need for Hoggett to bring all the sheep down to the collecting pen, or to corner them all and catch her by a hind leg with his crook. He could simply point her out to the pig, and Babe would gently work her out of the bunch and bring her right to the farmer's feet, where she stood quietly waiting. It seemed like a miracle to Hoggett, but of course it was simple. Ma? Yes, young un? The boss wants to give you some more medicine. Oh, not again. 'Tis horrible stuff, that. But it'll make your cough better. Oh, come along, Ma, please. Oh, all right then, young un. Anything to oblige you. And there were other far more miraculous things that Babe could easily have done if the farmer had only known. For example, when it was time for the ewes to be separated from their lambs, now almost as big and strong as their mothers, Farmer Hoggett behaved like any other shepherd and brought the whole flock down to the pens and took a lot of time and trouble to part them. If only he'd been able to explain things to Babe, how easy it could have been. Dear ladies, will you please stay on the hill, if you'd be so kind? Youngsters, down you go to the collecting pen, if you please. There's good boys and girls, and it could have been done in the shake of a lamb's tail. However, Babe's increasing skill at working sheep determined Farmer Hoggett to take the next step in a plan which had begun to form in his mind on the day when the piglet had first penned the sheep. That step was nothing less than to take Pig with him to the local sheepdog trials in a couple of weeks' time. Only just to watch, of course, just so that he could have a look at well-trained dogs working a small number of sheep and see what they and their handlers were required to do. I'm daft, he thought, grinning to himself. He did not tell his wife. Before the day came, he put a collar and lead on Pig. He could not risk him running away in a strange place. He kept him on the lead all one morning, let him Fly do the work as of old. He need not have bothered. Babe would have stayed tight at heel when told. But it was interesting to note the instant change in the atmosphere as a collie ran out. Wolf! Wolf! Cried the flock, every sheep immediately on edge. Move, fools! Snapped Fly, and she hustled them and bustled them with little regard for their feelings. Babe! We want Babe! They bleated. Babe! To be sure, the work was done more quickly, but at the end of it the sheep were in fear and trembling, and the dog out of patience and breath. Steady! Steady! Called the farmer a number of times, something he never had to say to Babe. When the day came for the local trials, Farmer Hoggett set off early in the Lamb Rover, Fly and Babe in the back. He told his wife where he was going, though not that he was taking the pig, nor did he say that he did not intend to be an ordinary spectator, but instead more of a spy, to see without being seen. He wanted Pig to observe everything that went on without being spotted. Now that he had settled on the final daring part of his plan, Hoggett realised that secrecy was all important. No one must know that he owned what would you call him, he thought? A sheep pig, I suppose. The trials took place 10 miles or so away in a curved basin-shaped valley in the hills. At the lower end of the basin was a road. Close to this was the starting point where the dogs would begin their outrun, and also the enclosure where they would finally pen their sheep. Down there, all the spectators would gather. Farmer Hoggett, arriving some time before them, parked the Land Rover in a lane and set off up the valley by a roundabout way, keeping in the shelter of the bordering woods. Fly padding behind him, and Babe on the lead, trotting to keep up with his long strides. "Where are we going, Mum?" said Babe excitedly. "What are we going to do?" "I don't think we're going to do anything, dear," said Fly. "I think the boss wants you to see something." "What?" And that's where I'm going to leave it.